What is the most terrifying thing you've ever seen? My dad used to work security at a water park. Back when I was just a wee lad, we would go to the local 4th of July fireworks show every year. My dad said, "No, sweetie, those are too dangerous for you." And she got real quiet, and the grin disappeared from her face, and she started crying. The whole pile was completely engulfed. And when the fire chief got there, he said that it was probably an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring from one of the fireworks. By the time the place was emptied out and we got home, it was 3 in the morning, and my dad being the softy he is. And as I got dressed, I walked past my dad, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the floor. Yeah, still creeps me out. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't say anything for a second, he just kept staring at the floor. And then he said, "I think I know whose fireworks started that fire last night." I asked him to tell me about it, and he told me that the girl had come up to his booth earlier that morning after the fireworks were over, and she asked him if she could get some more and he said, "No, sweetie, you can't have any more you had enough." And she got real quiet again, and she stared at the ground for a second, and then she said in a low voice, "But I need them for the big finale." And my dad said, "What do you mean?" And she just stared at him and smiled this big, creepy smile and said, "You'll see later." And then she skipped off. And that's when my dad realized that she wasn't just some kid who liked fireworks. He said she was something else, something not quite right, something that knew what it was doing. Went inside and grabbed her a massive bag of candy and a couple of those little flags with the rockets in them, and gave it to her and sent her on her way. But my favorite part of the celebration was the week leading up to it, because that's when all the little kids would come running up to my dad at his security booth asking for free candy sparklers and those little flags with the rockets on them that you can put in the ground. Dad would always hook them up, especially the little girls. He had a soft spot for the little girls, and one little girl in particular stood out to me. She must have been no older than 6 or 7. And every day she would come up to the booth with the biggest grin, the biggest stars and stripes dress she could find, and she would ask for, "Can I have some sparklers, Mr. Security Guard?" My dad would give her whatever she wanted, and she would skip off, putting her little handheld fireworks in the grass and letting them burn out before coming back for more. But the day before the big show, she came up to the booth and asked for some bigger fireworks. Then it hit us. It was about 10 o'clock at night and we hadn't seen her leave. And then we heard it. Someone was screaming in the distance, "It's July! It's July!" And we both looked at each other and started to run. We got closer and closer to the sound, and we finally saw her standing in the middle of the parking lot holding a burning piece of cardboard in the shape of a rocket ship, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs, "It's July! It's July!" Then she jumped up and down, and the cardboard rocket ship flew out of her hands and landed on the ground. It landed on a big pile of highly flammable July 4th merchandise that had been left outside by one of the vendors. And the next thing we knew, the whole pile was a fiery inferno. My dad and I got to work putting out the fire, but it was no use. The next day I woke up early and started watching the news coverage of the fire. Yeah, I never thought much of it until this morning when I read in the paper that that little girl and her family had moved out of state a few weeks ago. Well, this is the story that I tell people when they ask me what my favorite holiday is. I was born and raised in the United States, and every year for as long as I can remember, we celebrated the 4th of July with a family barbecue. Our town wasn't big enough to have a public fireworks show, so my dad would buy the biggest fireworks he could find at the local supermarket and set them off in our backyard. We'd eat hot dogs and hamburgers and watermelon and drink lemonade until the sun went down, and then we watched the fireworks and amazed by the colors and the booms and the beautiful danger of it all. It was the one night of the year where I was allowed to stay up past my bedtime, and it was magical. But one year, everything changed. It was the summer of 1989, and I was 13 years old going on 14. I was obsessed with all things scary. I had watched the original Friday the 13th movies, and all of the Child S. Play movies, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. But that night I woke up and I turned to my side and I realized that the door was closed. I don't remember closing my door. It looked exactly like it did on screen, like an emaciated humanoid with dirt caked under its fingernails, and its eyes were soulless and scary, and it was holding a machete. It took a step towards me and I screamed, and it stopped and it tilted its head, and then it took another step forward and I rolled over and I buried my face in my pillow and I waited for it to strike, but it never did. Instead, it started to walk away, and I don't know why, but I suddenly felt brave. I sat up and I called out to it, "Hey, you forgot your machete?" And as it turned to leave, I threw off my covers and I got out of bed and I walked over to the door and I opened it and I stepped outside into the hallway, and I grabbed that machete and I walked back into my room and I got back into bed and I went back to sleep. And against my better judgment, I got out of bed and I walked over to my door and I pushed it open and I looked out into the hallway and everything was normal. I saw my parents' door down the hall. I saw my sister's door across the hall. I heard my dad snoring very loudly in his room, and I heard my mom and my sister talking very quietly in their room. And I walked back to my room and I got back into bed and I laid there, thinking maybe I had dreamed the whole thing. But then I remembered that I had been wearing a t-shirt that said I survived the 4th kind, and I had been wearing it when I went to sleep, and I had read all of the Goosebumps books, and every single one of R.L. Stein's horror series. So when my dad suggested we go see a movie on the 4th of July, I thought it would be a great idea to suggest a scary movie. My dad wasn't opposed to me watching scary movies, but he did draw the line at slashers, and he especially drew the line at slashers set on July. They were very supportive, and they pretended to believe me, and we all went out into the backyard and watched the fireworks and celebrated America's birthday, and I thought about how lucky I was to be alive and in America and free. I argued that it was just a movie and nothing bad could possibly happen on July, but he wasn't having it. So instead, we compromised on a different kind of scary movie, a found-footage alien movie called The Fourth Kind. The movie was terrifying. It was about this small town in Alaska that was being terrorized by an alien creature, and a doctor who was trying to help the townspeople was being driven insane by these creatures that were invading his dreams. And then at the end of the movie, we learned that the entire thing was actually a documentary, and that the creature was real, and it was still out there somewhere. And I was so scared that I didn't want to go to sleep, but my parents made me go to sleep, and I woke up in my own bed in my own room in my own house in the middle of July. And I was safe. Or was I? Because ever since I could remember, I always slept with my bedroom door open, and then I heard a knock at my door. I turned and I saw my door open, and standing in front of me was this creature from the movie. In the morning, of course, I told my parents about the most amazing dream I'd ever had. It was the scariest 4th of July I'd ever experienced. I grew up celebrating the 4th of July with my family every year, and we always had this huge cookout at our house. There would be potato salad, macaroni salad, hamburgers, hot dogs, watermelon, the whole 9 yards. So I decided to start a new tradition. I would spend the holiday with my friends, renting a cabin up north and drinking as much as we could handle. We packed enough beer to last us the entire weekend and arrived at the cabin fairly early in the afternoon. We spent the entire afternoon swimming and drinking until it was time to start up the grill. This time of the year is typically when mosquitoes come out in full force. And sure enough, as soon as the sun went down, they began to attack. After unloading the car, we cracked open a couple beers and headed over to the lake on the property to go swimming. The toilet water wasn't moving, but whatever was in it was clearly breathing. A small slit like a snake's mouth opened up on the side of the bowl and then closed. I cautiously approached the toilet and stuck my finger in the water. It was about 2 inches long and looked like a mix between a slug and a leech. Its skin was black and slimy, and it left a trail of toilet water behind as it slithered. We shut all of the windows and doors, lit some candles, and got to watching some classic 4th of July fireworks videos on YouTube. Mike, being the skeptic that he is, didn't believe me at first, but after seeing it for himself, he admitted that it was pretty disgusting. Finally, Mike said, "Screw it, let's just flush it." To this day, I still wonder if there's some sort of sewer monster living in the lake on that property, and if so, what else might it have brought with it? But when we pressed the button, nothing happened. The toilet wouldn't flush. And to be honest, we were a little scared. Who knows what other creatures were lurking around outside in the dark? The water around my finger began to swirl, and that's when I saw it. Something black and slimy was trying to climb up my finger, so I stood at the door and yelled, "Dude, come here, quick." Ryan came out of the room rubbing his eyes and asked what was wrong. I pulled my hand out of the toilet as fast as I could and watched as the creature tried to pull itself out of the water. My dad would buy the biggest fireworks he could find, the ones that would make the whole neighborhood shake. After, of course, turning off the water valve to the toilet. As the first light of the 4th of July came creeping in through the windows, we made our way to the couch to try and fall asleep. I thought, weird, maybe the pipes are just old and there's some sediment building up in the water tank. I dried my hands, walked back into the bathroom stall, and stared directly at the toilet. And my brother and I would go crazy with sparklers, the kind that burn for hours. But when I turned 18 and went off to college, I didn't get to spend many 4ths of July with my family anymore. So on the day before the holiday, I called my 2 best friends, Mike and Ryan, and we set out on our journey to the rental cabin. I excused myself to the bathroom and threw up all over the toilet. As I was washing my hands, I looked over at the sink and noticed something peculiar. The 4th of July is a very hot day, so it felt amazing to jump into the cool water. We quickly finished up our burgers and hot dogs and retreated back to the cabin. Around midnight, I started to feel a little sick to my stomach. It was probably from all of the beer I consumed earlier in the night. The water that was supposed to be crystal clear looked dark and murky like motor oil. What I saw next made me run back to the sink to get another good look. As soon as my finger touched the water, the breathing became more aggressive. Mike and Ryan were sleeping in the same room as I was, and I didn't want to wake him up and sound like an idiot. I pointed at the toilet, and that's when he noticed the creature. Ryan screamed, "Ew, gross," and went back to his room to get some more sleep. We sat there staring at the toilet for a few minutes, debating on what to do with it. With the power of friendship, we managed to push the creature into the bowl and get it to be flushed away. We didn't end up going to the lake to watch the fireworks like we had planned because none of us really felt like it. I never ended up finding out what that creature was.